Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, which is actually the last one from IPSI in 2020. I'm Sarah Harper. I work in the events team at IPSI. Thank you for joining us today. We were supposed to run this webinar with Luan on Monday, but unfortunately, due to Google's outage, we had to cancel it at the last minute. We're so sorry about this, but it was totally out of our control, and we hope the same thing won't happen today. I'm sure it won't. But thank you for those that have re-registered for today's webinar, and welcome back to Luan for the final time this year as well. Hi, Luan.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello, and Luan will be guiding you through social media and looking back over 2020, a year in review today. We have lots of you online today, which is great. Please feel free to ask questions in the questions box throughout the webinar. Luan will take questions at the end, but feel free just to put them in there whenever you want to. Any technical issues, I'll be here as well, so please send those in to me as well, and we will send you a recording of today's webinar either later on today or tomorrow morning for everyone to watch back in your own time. So for now, I will pass over to Luan to take it from here.
Thank you, Sarah, and yeah, thank you for re-registering if you were registered on Monday. I think the fact that Google went down just as we were about to go live kind of summarised part of the presentation for social media, a year in review, and what's happened this year. So as Sarah said, you will get a copy of the slide deck and a copy of the recording as well. Got some interactions, some questions for you today, but I will dive straight in. If we have met before, thank you for coming back. If we haven't, just very briefly, who am I? Who's sharing this with you? I'm a marketer. I've been a marketer for over 20 years now, working in agency, client side, and running my own consultancy business. I'll be in my 10th year next year, so looking forward to that. Social media, I guess, is my specialism. I work directly with clients, supporting them with social media. I teach, I train on social media. I've written a book on the subject, and I work directly with LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Google as well. And I'm really proud to be an IPSI ambassador and running another webinar, and the last one of, I will use the word unprecedented year. That's the last time it's going to appear in the slide deck as a review of social media 2020, but it certainly has been a year. And I think this is the third year I've done a review presentation. So I always look back on the slide deck for the year before and see what I predicted and what I thought might happen. And this is where we were 12 months ago. I was looking at social media and thinking, and reading around, so this isn't just what's in my head, this is what comes from the platforms and various sources that I read every week as well, that they would be, as they always are, updating their privacy policies and looking at safety measures. That has actually been more important than ever for the social media platforms this year. The misinformation around COVID and other topics, keeping people safe in terms of the information and what they're sharing. And of course, last month as well, we had the US election, and they had a lot of integrity measures around that as well. A big change that Facebook were talking about 12 months ago was limiting the number of ads pages could run simultaneously. They actually released that information not too long ago this year about what was happening, and it's several hundred ads you can run at a time. So even though they are introducing limits, I don't think that's going to affect any of us as smaller businesses. The removal of likes did roll out on Instagram. You don't get to see the number anymore. There was talk about it happening on Facebook, but I haven't seen that happening on Facebook. And we did see, this prediction came true as well, integration of messaging, that now Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp, all part of the Facebook family of apps, that you now can see various messages coming into single inboxes, which I think is really useful, depending on how many accounts you're managing and working with. Some other predictions and what we were talking about 12 months ago was mobile being first in everything that we're doing. I think that is still true to a certain extent, but the fact that we are less mobile, we have been in our homes for 9 months. For me, I'm probably picking up my mobile less than I was 12 months ago when I was traveling, having meetings, working from coffee shops, etc. But still, in terms of social media, there is a lot that happens on a mobile, some stuff that can only happen on a mobile, and that is still really important. Video content has grown this year, was always very popular. YouTube as a channel, always very popular, but we've seen probably more video content. Sarah and I were talking before. We did these sessions 12 months ago without being on camera, but you know, we do live our lives, it feels, on Zoom and Teams and on camera right now, so live video as well as recorded. 12 months ago, stories were really just Instagram, I think, coming into the play on Facebook, but of course we now have them on LinkedIn a couple of months ago, and very recently on Twitter as well in terms of fleets. TikTok was a big prediction for 2020, and actually I can share that that did happen as well. Some news over recent days were that TikTok beat Facebook to become the top app download worldwide this year. I think probably an increasing trend through lockdown was people going on TikTok, and of course, you know, those video formats as well on other platforms, which I'll talk about shortly. I did have a personal hope that LinkedIn groups would become more popular, more useful, both in terms of their functionality, but more used by people as well. That didn't really come into play this year. I think LinkedIn accelerated their events functionality this year, but hopefully, you know, it will still stay on my wish list. So a lot did happen that we were talking about 12 months ago, but of course what we didn't predict, no one predicted, I don't think anyone had this in their plans, and this is the word of 2020, apparently the Collins Dictionary word of the year is lockdown. It's not the only story from the last 12 months. There have been other key issues coming into play as well, particularly as we saw in the summer around Black Lives Matters. Lots of things have happened this year, but of course in March things hit the UK in particular. We went into lockdown, and it was at that time that IPSE and myself, we hosted a number of presentations on this topic of how to adapt your social media activity in times of uncertainty. That presentation is still available. I think there's probably some things that I would change now about the advice I gave then. The advice I looked back was very much use the words unprecedented and challenging times, but I think perhaps they've been overused now and we have moved on slightly. And that's probably the biggest key, I think, is that we've had to stay really agile this year in our communications. But the other advice and the research that I was looking at in the time early April was how for social media our tone of voice changed in terms of how we were writing things. We were less promotional, we were showing more empathy in our copy, in our words, in what we were doing, talking about the world that we were living in that was constantly changing and that was affecting all of us as well. It wasn't just the words, it was also the imagery. And I don't know about you, but now if I see photos and, you know, films and things on the telly with crowds of people, you automatically have this, you know, that's not social distance, or they're not wearing a mask. So there's lots of elements to social media that we've had to take into account this year. I'm going to recap some of the key changes in a minute, but I really thought this quote from Hootsuite and their social trends report for 2021 looking forward really summarised what this year has all been about. The pandemic has given executives renewed appreciation for social media, which became the strongest bridge for connecting with customers after so many traditional strategies collapsed. There was a lot of work, there's a lot of stats all the time around social media, but all of them showed increased use of social media, not just for work, but for staying connected with friends and family as well. No doubt media consumption has significantly changed this year, what we're doing, how many hours we're spending on screen. There has been an acceleration of change this year, and some of this I think has been positive. I think there has been opportunities that have come out of this crisis, as well as changes that none of us planned for and none of us wished for 12 months ago. We have this need for human connection, and I think that's really shown up this year. So before I move on to what the platforms have done this year, I wanted to see what you guys watching this webinar live have changed this year. So we've got a few quick polls for you. First one, let's do this. If you could just pop on your screen, I'm going to ask this 4 times about 4 different platforms. In 2020, did your use of LinkedIn increase, decrease, stay the same, or if you don't use it, then tick the don't use LinkedIn? Give it 5 more seconds. Okay, closing the poll, and let's see. So 61% of you have increased your use of LinkedIn this year, 36% stayed the same. No one has decreased their use. I think that's really interesting. And 3% of you not using LinkedIn right now. Huge, huge increase. Okay, let's have a look at Facebook. Same question. In 2020, did your use of Facebook increase, decrease, stay the same, or don't use it? Think about this in a work context. Okay, I think you've all completed that one. Let me close that poll and share the results with you. 47% of you increased your use of Facebook, some decreased, some stayed the same. 25% of you don't use it, but still quite a big increase right there. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. In 2020, did your use of Instagram increase, decrease, stay the same, or you don't use it? You're very quick to answer these questions. I'll just give it a couple more seconds. See it stop moving. Okay, I'll close this one and share the results. So again, quite a big increase. 34% of you have increased your use of Instagram this year. Some of you have decreased, some stayed the same. More of you don't use Instagram as a platform compared to the LinkedIn and Facebook that we've talked about so far. We have hosted webinars on each of the platforms this year. So if it is you're not using them because you're not quite sure how, we've certainly got libraries in the deck with some advice on those if they were things that you wanted to use. We'll ask about that later. Let's just do the last poll. Okay, in 2020, did your use of Twitter increase, decrease, stay the same, or do you not use it? A few more seconds. Okay, looks like you're all done with this one. Different results for every platform. 55% of you increased your use of Twitter this year, only 3% decreased. 23% stayed the same, and almost 20% of you don't use it. So quite big increases across all 4 of those platforms. If you've got any questions or comments on that, I'd love to see them in the chat box so we can perhaps pick up on why you've increased your use or decreased, or comments on those at the end. That'd be really interesting if you've got anything to share on your answers to those questions. So pleased, Sarah, that those polls worked. Thank you for setting those up. Let's have a look at the changes that happened to social media this year. Social media in 2020. And again, I compared this to where we were this time last year. I do a roundup of social media changes every Monday morning. I'll share a link with you at the end that you could sign up and receive those straight to your email inbox if you wanted to. And I get those changes from the platforms themselves. I go into their newsrooms and from some key websites that I believe are highly credible. Report on them every Monday. Also write them up all into a blog as well, and I've got the link for you at the end if you want to go through these, because hopefully you'll be pleased to know that I'm not going through the 364 changes that I found on social media this year. 48 changes to LinkedIn compared to 55 last year. 81 changes to Twitter this year, 96 last year. 154 to Facebook versus 146, and a lot more changes to Instagram. That's probably the most significant number of changes to the platform compared to 2019. Some of those changes, particularly earlier on this year, but they're still happening, were specifically related to supporting businesses in reaction to COVID, around the challenges that were presented and opportunities of how the platforms could help. In August, I did a roundup white paper. It can still be accessed via this link, or we can send it out afterwards, specifically around how the social media platform supported businesses, whether that was with changes to how you shared your opening hours, delivery information, new features that could help businesses during COVID and now plural lockdowns. There was a lot of them. So I'm not going through all 364. You'll be very pleased to hear I've just got one slide on each of the 4 platforms with what I read back through as being the biggest changes of the year. And they're in no particular order on each slide, but I'm starting with LinkedIn. They had a new chief exec in June. Reid Hoffman, the previous, Jeff Weiner, Reid Hoffman launched LinkedIn. Jeff Weiner, their previous CEO, is still involved with LinkedIn, but there is a new chief exec from the middle of this year. The structure of LinkedIn, LinkedIn have also had to make redundancies this year in light of COVID and how things have changed in a number of their teams. And they did a great job, I think. You'll see in the white paper around really sharing how they were dealing with COVID in terms of their staff and features on the platforms. We saw a new look and feel to LinkedIn on the desktop rolling out from September. Not too many features with that rollout, but just visually looked quite different. But I think the biggest change that LinkedIn have done this year, in light of their role as a platform and the functionality they have, but also in light of what's happening in the world, is that they have released many more ways to help job seekers. From the open to work that you can see that's I included on this image of the top of my profile here, to resources to help job seekers, interview prep, things like that. So if you are in those situations, there's lots of resources on LinkedIn to help you. There is now a dedicated events section on LinkedIn. They brought forward their release of that. They're adding new features all the time, but if you are organising events, you can certainly promote it on LinkedIn now, start discussions, invite your network to know about the event. On your profile, there is new features. There is now a featured section. It sits slightly underneath that heading, but if you've written posts or articles that you want to kind of pin to the top of your profile, that is now there. It's called featured. There was a nice little feature that was added in the autumn. You can see the symbol next to my own LinkedIn profile, where you can add an audio recording for your name. The intention with that was if you have a name that's difficult to pronounce, or if you were having a phone call or a conversation with someone, you could perhaps learn how to pronounce their name before you spoke to them. Not everyone has added this functionality yet, of course, but it's very easy to do on your mobile, and it's 10 seconds long. So actually, you can say more than just your name in that 10 seconds. You can have a really short elevator pitch as an audio recording next to your name on your own LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn launched stories. I've already mentioned those over the last couple of months. They're only on the mobile app at the moment. They sit along the top, just as they do with the other social media platforms. It's a new feature. Some people are testing it out. And in terms of companies using LinkedIn. There has been many more features for company pages, including in the last week, some additional functionality being announced for launch next year. So that's something to look out for. I'm not always a huge advocate of focusing on company pages because I think that there is much more power and connection from a personal profile, but it is good to see that LinkedIn is changing that and giving some more emphasis to the company page areas. If you have a premium level of LinkedIn, you're using it significantly for business development. If you're using their sales navigator platform, they've added a lot of new features to that this year. They did have a platform, it's just closing down shortly, called Elevate, which is for larger organizations who want to have a employee advocacy program around what they do and help with content sharing, but they're wrapping that up into the company page tools as well. So there will be a lot more management centrally, but I hope and I don't believe that that will shift significantly from the profile being the most important part of LinkedIn. Over on Twitter, a big change really quite early on in the year around reporting and analytics and what you could find out. They removed their audience insights, which I thought was a bit of a shame because you used to be able to find out who your followers were and their demographics and their country and information about them, and unfortunately they removed that. So slightly less insights around your audience on Twitter, but of course the same data around your posts and engagement and things like that is absolutely still there and within Twitter analytics. If you weren't using a third-party platform for any scheduling on any of the social media tools, then actually they've incorporated that into their own platforms this year. You can now schedule tweets from their app. And like the other platforms, you know, the overall sentiment of the year around managing misinformation, looking after user safety, they added a number of features, some of which have now been switched off post-election in the States. But I think these are really good. They're prompts that they had on retweets when you hadn't opened the link. It's always in my social media do's and don'ts presentation to make sure that you know what you're sharing. And I love the fact that Twitter added something to make sure that you'd read something before you shared it to your own audience. Twitter lists have always been a key feature. If you're not using them, we'll refer to the Twitter presentation. They're a great feature to be able to follow people without them knowing that you're following them and manage your newsfeed by separating things out to lists. Twitter has kind of really brought them to the forefront this year, and if you are using Twitter more and not using lists yet, it's definitely a feature you should go and have a look at. Again, like the other platforms, they made a number of changes to their ad formats this year, and in the last few weeks they introduced stories, but Twitter actually gave them their own name of fleets. I don't know if anyone's used those yet. I can see some people experimenting with them. Again, mobile only at the moment. Moving on to Facebook, loads of changes on Facebook, as there always is year in, year out. They, like LinkedIn, updated their desktop layout. Some loved it, some hated it. Some of us kept switching back to the old one whenever we could. Maybe just because we don't like change, but some features were missing from the new desktop layout. In line with COVID, but also those other key events of the year, Facebook launched various resources to help, from small business support, community hubs, mental health resources, tools for educators and all those educating from, you know, homeschooling earlier in the year, specific support for Black-owned businesses, and also around climate change as well, which isn't a disappearing topic. Their own area for scheduling and creation, Creator Studio, had a number of updates this year and increased functionality. You may be using that, you may not. It's certainly something I would recommend checking out if you're not. Messenger Rooms launched. Messenger Rooms are where you can go to have conversations with up to 50 people. Very much, I believe, a reaction to the increased popularity of Zoom when we went into lockdown earlier in the year. One of the key functions for Facebook, one of the key areas that they've been focusing on in the last couple of years has been groups, and they have launched a number of management tools and analytics for group managers over the last 12 months. I am really just recapping on the headlines. All the details are available in a blog if you want to dive into any of these afterwards. In line with COVID, but also supporting small businesses and the changing world, both Facebook and Instagram have done a lot of work around online shopping and e-commerce. Monetization of Facebook and the tools has come into the play as well, with Facebook allowing you to earn money from online events. Again, I'm sure that was something that was accelerated because of the changes now. If you're doing any advertising on Facebook, I'm sure you will have been pleased to see that they removed their restriction on text content. So there was always a rule around how much text you could have in an image on a Facebook ad, which was always a bit of a hindrance when things got rejected. They still have advice that it's best to not have too much text in your ads, but they have removed that restriction. They have expanded their use of hashtags and monitoring of hashtags on Facebook. I still think it's very much use of branded hashtags on Facebook rather than hashtags for getting your content found as we use them on the other platforms. But it's all about users as much as the functionality. And again, around misinformation, news management, Facebook now has a notification screen to let you know that if you're seeing an article and if you're about to share it, it will let you know if it's more than 90 days old, which I think is a really good feature. News has moved really fast this year. Whatever we were reading earlier in the year has changed and isn't up to date. So having that notification, I think, is a really useful feature. And finally, the fourth social media platform that I report on and use and look at and train on is Instagram, who, believe it or not, celebrated their 10th birthday in October. So, it's the newest social media platform that we're using, most of us, apart from TikTok, that's accelerated this year. But for Instagram being the newer of the four to celebrate its 10th birthday, I think that's quite significant change in 2020. They did a lot around staying at home and lockdown, particularly with stickers to encourage people to share stories and images of how they were staying at home. They've supported raising money for causes this year. Fundraising, charities in particular have been hit significantly during COVID and lockdowns, so they've facilitated features for that as well. Stories have been on Instagram for a good couple of years now, but they're always testing new ways for people to view them and get involved with them. Pinning some comments to the top can be useful if you have a very engaged audience on Instagram and want to highlight some kind of top comments, and you can now pin those. Keyword search is coming to Instagram, which will enable us to find things not just by the use of hashtags, but by searching for keywords that are being used across Instagram. And then other features as well. They've been updating Instagram TV. They've introduced guides, which is a way of collating information. As I said, shops, a big feature on both Facebook and Instagram to support small businesses and e-commerce. Changes to their home screen. They just like change, don't they, these platforms? Instagram Reels launched a few weeks ago, months ago now, not too long ago. They launched with 15 seconds, very similar to TikTok, but have already expanded that to 30-second videos. And in the last week or so, they have announced shopping in Reels as well. So lots of changes have happened. Before I talk about what I think is going to happen in 2021, I'd love to do some more polls, recapping next step of the questions I asked earlier in a similar fashion. Let's see how these will work. Your first question: in 2021, your use of LinkedIn, how do you think you'll be using it next year? Is it going to increase, decrease, stay the same, or will you still not use it? Couple more seconds. We'll compare these stats afterwards and share them again. Okay, these results. 59% of you are going to increase your LinkedIn even more, perhaps. Can't tally those up. 37% stay the same. So no one's not going to use LinkedIn next year. So I think there was a few of you before that weren't using it, and just 4% are going to decrease. That's really interesting. Again, if you've got any comments on that, please do pop it in the chat or the questions for a few minutes' time. Let's see about Facebook. In 2021, how are you going to use Facebook for your business? Are you going to increase, decrease, stay the same, or not use it? I love that you're diving straight into this. Okay, I'll close this one. It looks like you've finished on this one. Only 17% of you are going to increase your use of Facebook in 2021, some decrease. 39% of you will stay the same, and 30% of you still won't use it. We'll compare those stats to earlier and follow up with those when we send the recording, I think. Next one. In 2021, your use of Instagram, is it going to increase, decrease, stay the same, or will you not use it? A few more seconds on this one. Okay, so Instagram. 22% of you will increase your use of Instagram, 9% decrease, 35% stay the same, and some of you still won't be using it. Okay. And the last poll for today. In 2021, your use of Twitter, are you going to increase, decrease, stay the same, or not use it? Okay, I think we're done with that. Thank you for participating in these. Let's share the final results. In 2021, your use of Twitter, 43% will increase, just 9% decrease, 39% stay the same, and a few of you won't use it. I think there's a lot of increasing going on for next year. Doesn't need to be big increases, but good to know that social media is still on everyone's agenda. Okay. When I was putting this slide deck together for Monday, but I rechecked it. I didn't call it predictions because I think anyone predicting anything now is very difficult to do. So I've entitled my slide simply Social Media in 2021. Some news that's already been released is that Facebook will be launching Facebook News in the UK in January. So there will be more of a news presence on Facebook, which I think will be interesting in terms of how people use it as their source of information. The US government are talking about breaking up Facebook and the family of apps, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. In the last week, Twitter announced a new integration to share tweets in Snapchat stories and Instagram coming soon. So I think that may be something to watch. I thought that was really interesting to see how the platforms might collaborate and integrate over time. I believe, it's not just my belief, I think this is, it would be very surprising if it didn't, the battle for misinformation on social media will continue, particularly around vaccinations. We already know this, but I think it's an ongoing challenge for the social media platforms. I feel, and I've read around this, I'm not the only person, I'm sure, that thinks that stories will be more active than feeds. It's the way that we're using social media. Stories are raw, in the moment, behind the scenes. Pick up your phone to create them. people with their feeds feel, I think, that they have to be a bit more considered and planned and prepared on those, whereas stories in the moment, and hopefully as we start to leave our homes and go back to offices and events, we will have more story content perhaps. Video will still be important, no doubt about that, particularly lives as we're doing now. E-commerce, the indicators from Facebook and Instagram of what they have already launched over recent weeks, but the trends coming out around, shops, physical shops were closed during Black Friday this year. E-commerce has grown significantly. We've seen that from the big players, from Amazon, but also the reports from Royal Mail and how they are slightly struggling to deliver right now. We've got into that habit. We were always in the habit, but that has grown, and I think that's an opportunity for businesses as well to have an online presence and sell online as much as they were physically. A couple of wishes I thought I would put on my list really was, even though Twitter might be integrating, I would like to see some distinctiveness between the platforms. I'm not a fan of posting the same thing on every platform without adjusting the text for the nuance and the style. But I think now that every platform has stories and every platform has similar functionality, I would like to see some more distinctiveness around knowing LinkedIn is for this purpose with this audience and Facebook is for this purpose with this audience. I don't really want to see there being a big merger between how people are doing things, and hope that for everyone that's doing more, that you will still differentiate it by platform. And you don't need to use every platform as well. And also, one of the things that comes up in a lot of the training that I do and the conversations with individuals as well, not just for business use, is that users need to understand their privacy settings, what they're sharing and who they're sharing it with. Photos, images, texts, and having an understanding, and I think as users being more in control of these platforms as well, and their role in people's lives is, I think, really important. And I'm going to finish with some top tips that I have for every year, really, not specifically any year, but always optimize your profiles, make sure that they're always complete and up to date and fully completed and ready for you to do business. Even though plans did change this year, I still think you need to have a plan so that you still focus on end goals, can review your plan and know what you're working towards. But perhaps we need to make sure that with our learnings this year, that our plans always include what we would do in a crisis and how we would need to change things and where we need to go. Primarily, we should always be focusing on our target audience and what they need to know from us. I think there's a bigger opportunity for making sure that we use social media to have one-to-one personal human conversations and not just being all about broadcasting messages and posting to hit the number of posts we need to do a day. Really focus, we can't connect at real life events anymore. We need to connect one-to-one and use it for having conversations. It's about staying visible. It's what I talked about back in March about how to adapt your social media, whether your business has been challenged this year, it may have been more successful this year. What we need to be doing is staying visible all the time, consistently, being helpful and being authentic, being ourselves. Everything we need to do has to be legal, decent, honest and truthful. And if you're ever looking for answers, and if you've heard any of my sessions, I'll always say it depends, or it's in your own data. Always go to your own data for answers to your questions and insights. And around that, I mean things like what's in, what your audience are engaging with, what's driving traffic to your website, what's of interest to people. Look for the answers, direct people to do those actions that you want them to do, and then just look at your own data, both within social media, within your business, of what you should stop doing, start doing, keep doing, and do more of. They're the 4 areas I usually focus on. And of course, staying up to date. We've seen how many changes happened to social media. I didn't go through all 364 of them, and that was on Monday. There has been more since, and I can do that all for you with a weekly email update, and the link is there if you want to join my email list. Thank you for joining this session. A quick cartoon just to finish. Stay focused on your priorities. Don't get distracted by the new shiny things. Being distracted this year was probably very easy, losing our focus, trying to adapt to change, but we've got to stay focused on our end goals, have a plan and work towards them. Here's some further resources, those links to the full blog of all the updates, my blog that has lots of resources on how to use the platforms, links to previous webinars, and of course the IPSE website for resources as well. I will share this QR code with you before we go to questions. And Sarah, if you want to jump back in, if you can scan this on screen or in the slide deck when you get a copy of the recording, we'd love your feedback on this session as we shape what we're doing for 2021, and to just see how you found this session, what you'll find useful. And we've now got a QR code to allow you to do that. It should only take a minute or so to answer the questions. Have we got any questions? Increase into or some comments on how people have voted. Let me switch my slide deck off. Go back to the webcam. Increase in Twitter due to needing to express views on how government is performing. Okay. Is Facebook really an appropriate platform for professional business? I don't know the type of business that you have, but absolutely, there is hundreds, thousands of business pages on Facebook with a presence, posting content, hosting groups, engaging with their peers, with Facebook shops. So I guess it does depend on what your business is, but absolutely it is a place for businesses to be. Someone's reduced their personal use of Facebook, not business use. Support their business. Someone agreeing that Facebook that maybe needs to be broken up as they are doing. Comments. If anyone hasn't signed up to my Monday emails, please do. Can we add a Twitter edit button to the wish list? They're always talking about having an edit button on Twitter, but always denying that they'll do it. But I do think Jack Dorsey, who runs Twitter, did say if everyone wore masks, he would add an edit button at some point. But I think it's mainly because it's in the moment and tweets getting quoted that they don't want people to edit them retrospectively. So I understand why there's no edit button, but you only ever see a typo, don't you, once you've posted. Insights for fleets, I'm not sure on those ones yet because they're still rolling out how people are doing them. So I would suggest the Twitter help section itself, always go straight to the platforms. They've all got help sections, Q&As, search for Twitter help fleets, and everything that they can give you about those I'm sure will be on there. I might guess that they're probably within the app themselves rather than the desktop, but I haven't looked for those yet, Vicky. Use social media more because I felt lonely and isolated, had less work, so needed to increase online presence. Absolutely, I think we'll find that more and more research will come out on how we've used social media this year, not all for business use, but in terms of staying connected with our communities as well. Got one more question. What is a Twitter list? A big question, Matthew. I will include a link in the slide deck. I've written a blog on what Twitter lists are and how to use them. They are very simply lists where you can put put someone on a list. So I could have put all of you onto a Twitter list and then just be able to go into Twitter and see what you are posting. So you can create Twitter lists of news sources, of clients, of competitors. They can be private lists, which means no one else knows about them, don't know they're on a list, or you can have fully public lists as well. But it just really means that, yeah, if I wanted to go and look at IPSE members on Twitter and created a list, I could then just go and look at what they are doing. So it really helps me focus and manage my content in a much tighter way, but I'll include a link to those in the deck. Can't see any other questions, can you, Sarah?
I've got one for you, Luan, about just thinking over the Christmas period. Should we be posting on social media over Christmas, or do we leave it for a couple of weeks? What are the rules around that?
Do you know, I wrote an article for IPSE magazine on this question this time last year, and my answer this time last year was yes, you should stay visible. Maybe schedule a couple of posts in, maybe have a kind of like a pinned post of, you know, Happy Christmas or what your opening hours. I think staying visible is important, but I think actually this year more than ever, I think we all need to switch off for a couple of weeks, have some reduced screen time. So I would suggest that, you know, if you're in that position, do a final message this week, tell people when you're coming back, put your out of office on. I hope that we will all reduce our screen time. Even though we can't see friends and families as we wish we would, I think the business world we need a bit of rest. So normally I would say, yeah, keep going, but I think this year I would advise, you know, everyone needs some downtime and to clear their heads for the new year.
Good advice, thank you very much. I think that might be it for the questions for today. Thank you so much, Luan, for today's session. That was really interesting, and we look forward to working with you again in 2021. And thank you for all the online content for this year as well, and for delivering our last webinar for 2020. And thank you to everyone for attending today as well. We'll send around the recording later today or tomorrow morning. And we have an action-packed online event schedule for 2021 already. Looking at January, we've got webinars on your brand, imposter syndrome, self-assessment tax returns, and plenty more on IR35, of course, as well. So check out our events pages for that, and I will send you the link in the post-event webinar email as well. So for now, for myself and from Luan, thank you for joining our final webinar of the year. Have a lovely Christmas, stay safe, and we will see you in 2021. Thank you.
Thanks everyone, bye.
Bye.